And we are live with the Unprocessed podcast. I'm super excited to be joined today by Marion Nestle. She is a nutritionist, professor of nutrition and food studies at NYU, and a world-renowned author of over 15 books, including Food Politics, Safe Food, and What to Eat. Marion, thank you for being here.
Oh, glad to be here.
Awesome. So just jumping right into it, why have small farms been left behind in our modern food system?
Oh, because we're feeding the world. The small farms have been declining in the United States since before the 1930s. In the 1930s, they went out of business because of the Dust Bowl and because of federal policies that weren't supporting them. And now they're going out because in the 1970s, the Secretary of Agriculture said, get bigger, get out. And that policy has been followed ever since. I know lots of people who would like to farm on a small scale, but they don't have enough money to buy land, they don't have enough money to buy equipment, and they don't have reasonable outlets for what they're producing.
Yep.
They don't have reliable outlets, they don't have easy outlets. And until those problems are solved, I don't see this changing.
Yeah. So what are some of the specific government policies in place that are more advantageous for industrial bigger farms versus small farms?
I can hardly think of one that isn't.
Yeah.
The No, the whole thing is set up. So the way the crop insurance works, the way the subsidies work, the way fruits and vegetables are considered specialty crops and are in the horticulture line of the farm bill.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as if food for people is a stepchild of the agricultural system, and the entire agricultural system is set up to feed animals or to fuel, these days, to fuel automobiles.
Yeah.
If you look at what happens to the supply of corn that's grown in the United States, 45% of it goes for feeding animals, 45% of it or more goes for ethanol for automobiles, leaving a tiny percentage
Yeah.
of corn that goes to feed people in any form whatsoever.
Yeah.
So this is not a system that's designed to try to support small farms as advantageous as supporting small farms would be for
Right.
repopulating middle America, making middle America prosperous, and doing a lot of other really good things.
Yeah. And that's something interesting that a lot of people like to say, or they assume that there's not enough land or farmland to feed the masses on a smaller scale.
Are you kidding?
Yeah. That's what I say. That's what I
Yeah,
say.
growing corn for ethanol?
Yeah.
Stop doing that. For one thing, it's an
Right.
incentive to grow corn in places where corn should never be grown
Mm.
because there's not enough water.
Yeah.
Or the soil isn't right.
Mm.
And corn uses up a lot of fertilizer. And the more fertilizer you use, the more polluted the streams are. I mean, I could go on and on and on.
Yeah. And then on the food itself. So I mean, they're growing the corn and the soy and then feeding it to the livestock, and then that in turn makes the meat less healthy. So it's like all of it is kind of working together to be worse off for the consumer in the end. So not only are we
Well,
using, yeah, not only is using our farmland for less productive things for feeding people, but it's also making the livestock less healthy as well.
yeah, and I can't even begin to talk about what it's doing to the environment.
Mm,
I mean, there isn't a waterway in the United States that
yeah,
isn't filled with agricultural chemicals.
no,
That may be
100%.
that may be an exaggeration, but a lot of waterways are polluted,
Yeah.
and nobody's doing anything about that.
No. And it's like
Um,
it's not it's bigger than just being next to a farm that's spraying chemicals. It's I mean, obviously the water cycle, that's why I think every waterway is polluted in some way because anything that goes into any water system is going to come up and come back down. And it's just yeah, it's a shame for
mm.
everybody. So that's one of our. I'm not sure if you looked into what we do at Locavana at all, but
Not at all.
yeah, no, it's okay. You're busy. So we're a startup. We're based in West Michigan in Chicago, and our core focus is to make local healthy food accessible to everybody. Um, so we basically partner with local farms. Customers can shop on our website, and then we pick it up from the farms and then deliver it right to the customer. So we found that once people see that fresh food, they taste it, and they know where it's coming from, it really, helps them connect with it. And then after they try it, they never want to go back. So in your experience talking to people and interacting with farmers or even in the policy setting, like where does the transparency and freshness of local food, how does that impact consumer trust, and then their dietary habits?
Well, it depends on who the consumers are and whether they have access to this or not.
Right.
Um, you know, People who go to farmers markets because the food is better, it's more varied, it's fresher, and they like the idea of meeting their farmer.
Hmm.
So they have a personal connection to it. If you don't have the opportunity to do that, how would you know?
Yeah.
I mean, and some supermarkets are better about keeping produce fresh than others. Those tend to be in wealthier areas. And we have a heavily divided food system in which people have become accustomed to buying food in packages. Lots of people don't know how to cook. They don't have the equipment. They don't have refrigerators. They don't have pots and pans. They don't have knives. They don't have all kinds of things. And we're not teaching cooking in schools anymore. So there have
Sure.
been big societal changes that I think are not necessarily for the better.
Right. What steps do you think we could take to make this type of food more accessible to people who can't afford to shop at a farmer's
Hmm.
market?
Well, we have to change the political system
Hmm.
to make that a priority. And, I tend to start by saying we need to overturn Citizens United and get money out of politics. That's step one. And nothing will happen until that. Nothing really can happen except at the margins until that happens. We need legislators to be making policies that will produce healthier food for more people and healthier food for the environment. Or we're not going to have a food supply because we're not going to be able to grow our own.
Hmm.
Um, these are political issues
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
than anything else, and politics is not something that most people who care about food care about. But I
Right.
think we have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something obviously you talk a lot about in your blogs and in your books. And that was one thing I wanted to ask you about was like all this money that we have that food companies spend on marketing. If we were to rely on government more when it comes to setting dietary guidelines and food policy, including how we can market, well, how they can market to people and use psychology to market to people. How can we ensure that those marketing dollars don't then just shift into more lobbying to get policy that
Yeah.
is beneficial?
I'm really not sure what you're asking because to me, this is not a marketing issue.
Hmm.
This is a systems issue. And what
Okay.
I mean by that is if you want people to eat healthfully, they have to have enough money to do that.
Hmm.
If you want farmers to produce healthy food and farmers to survive, they have to be paid adequately so they make a living. The idea that farmers can't make a living is just absolutely outrageous.
Hmm.
And it's not sustainable.
Right.
You want to know why farms are disappearing? They're disappearing because farmers aren't making enough money. If they did make enough money, nobody could afford to buy food. Therefore, the food has to be subsidized.
Hmm.
Somebody has to make a decision to do that.
Yeah.
So I see this as systems issues. You
Okay.
want people to eat healthy food. You make that healthy food available, affordable, and accessible in
Yeah.
ways that it certainly isn't now.
Very true. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean these are systems issues.
Okay.
You change the system. Very hard to think about doing that. Very
Yeah.
difficult to think about doing it, especially now.
Right.
But that's what we need to be working toward.
Yeah.
Is a
How do you
systems change.
Have you seen any movement on that front in the last 10 to 20 years
Well, the
making
food
steps?
movement in general,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not sure how to define the food movement or whether there is one, but it's certainly vast numbers of people are interested in healthier and more sustainable food.
yeah,
And there are, literally thousands of organizations working on these issues, but that's part of the problem.
yeah.
There should be one organization working on these issues,
Mm,
and then it might have some power, because the power is divided among so many different people working on so many different issues.
yeah,
Everybody's organization having to raise money to pay the salary of
yeah.
the director and the staff and all of those kinds of things. We have to get beyond that, and I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting too, especially today with our social media in this modern age. There's so many health influencers and so many different perspectives. Like for a while, we had to contend with the dietary guidelines and different efforts from lobbying and from big companies to push certain dietary agendas. But now consumers are hearing a million different things from a million different people with credentials on social media. So, like, what advice would you give consumers today for how to navigate those varying messages that they see every day? Like, how do you strip back all of the noise and sort of find a healthy diet that works for you?
Well, healthy diets are so simple that the journalist Michael Pollan can do it in 7 words: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's really all there is to it, especially if you define food as real food and food that's not been heavily processed. Um, that's all there is to it. Anything beyond that is hype, or it's somebody who's trying to sell you a product or a supplement or some food product that you don't need, really, if you just ate real food and not too much of it and made sure you had plenty of plants in your diet. The So I see a lot of that as, anytime I hear everything you thought you knew about nutrition is wrong, oh, a red flag goes up very high in the air. That's a warning that somebody's trying to sell you something. And
Right.
then it's a question of what are they trying to sell you and why?
Mm,
And that requires a fair amount of critical thinking. But these people are fun
yeah.
and they look terrific, so you think I'll do what they do.
Yeah.
But I say, what are they trying to sell, and is somebody paying them
Mm,
to do it? I mean, sometimes they say, sometimes they don't.
yeah. And
But
for those who have the ability to um, financial ability to shop where they want, whether that's grocery store or farmers
mhm.
market, and they have the choice, what would you recommend that they look for? So obviously there's a whole even like at the grocery store there's conventional, there's organic, but then you can take it a step further at the farmers market. There's that this farm is 100% chemical free. They're no
Only if
till.
they say so.
Right. No, that's what I
Yeah,
mean. I'm saying
yeah.
there's a
Hmm.
level of transparency there.
Hmm.
So I guess if you were a consumer when you're buying your meat, your produce, what would be the things that you would look for that aren't just necessarily gimmicky marketing
Well,
tactics?
I look for real food produced under conditions that are as favorable to what's being produced as possible, and organic whenever possible because it's codified, it has real meaning.
Mm,
If money were no object,
yeah.
then that's what you would do. I like knowing who produces the food. I like knowing how they produce it, and I'm privileged enough to be able to make those kinds of choices, and I don't eat that much, so I don't mind
Yeah.
spending money on it.
Yeah.
The um, but I think for most people, it's quite possible to eat healthfully in any grocery store in America.
Yeah.
Grocery store, not dollar store, not
Right.
corner store, not whatever, but any grocery store in America has healthy foods, but
Hmm.
they cost more.
Yeah.
They're not only perceived as costing more, they really do cost more.
Yeah.
And that's not a trivial consideration,
Right.
especially now that prices have gone up so much.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and there are plenty of studies that show that the cost of fresh foods, real foods, has gone up higher than the cost of heavily processed foods.
Mm.
the cost of all foods has gone up,
Yeah.
but the cost of fresh foods has gone up higher. So that either means eating less of it or growing your own. I'm greatly in favor of growing your
Yeah.
own if
Oh
you
yeah, me too.
can,
Yeah,
but most people can't.
definitely.
So, we need a food system that's focused on health,
Yeah.
not
So
so much on what it's currently focused on.
definitely. So would you say that like the disparity in prices rising with ultra processed foods versus fresh foods, is that mostly a product of subsidies, or is there something else to that?
What's a product of everything? The subsidies are there for corn, soybeans, and basic ingredients
Yeah.
in processed foods, and also for meat, because the cost to feed is lower than it would be otherwise.
Right.
But there are ways in which the government supports big business that you never think about. For example, the cost of marketing is deductible as a business expense.
Hmm.
So the amount of money that ultra processed food companies spend in marketing to kids is deductible as a income. The taxpayers pay for that, and a
Yeah.
lot of the real costs of food, are externalized, so that taxpayers pay for the cost of cleaning up the environment,
Hmm.
and the health risks
Yeah.
that people have from eating too much and eating too much of the wrong kinds of foods.
Right. You mentioned marketing, and that's something that I'm particularly interested in because I'm in marketing, and that's one of the reasons that I got into it is because I was so adamantly opposed to the psychologically driven marketing in food and pharma. So I wanted to sort of come in and make a difference. That's what everybody says. But in food politics and in other things, you talk a lot about the parallels between big tobacco and today's food marketing efforts. Could you speak on that a little bit and how
Sure.
food companies leverage those psychological triggers to influence decisions?
I mean, the tobacco industry knew very early on that smoking cigarettes caused lung cancer. It didn't cause lung cancer in everybody, but it caused lung cancer in a lot of people. And so they went about casting doubt on the research. That's where it all started.
Mm.
You just say, well, it's your choice. First of all, they blame it on personal responsibility. We're not forcing you to smoke. They cast doubt on the research. The research wasn't done long enough. There aren't enough people. There's some people who can smoke and not get lung cancer. I mean, however they did that.
Yeah.
And food is not cigarettes, but the cigarette companies own food companies. And when they did, they taught the food companies how to follow the same playbook,
Mm.
which the food industry has done assiduously ever since. Cast doubt on the research that there's something wrong with their product or that they're overfeeding or over marketing, blame personal responsibility, fund their own research so they get the answers that they want,
Yeah.
hire experts to, um, protect them. And all of that's been very successful
Hmm.
in making people extremely confused about what to eat. And if people are confused about what to eat, they'll eat anything without thinking about it.
Right.
So,
Especially when it tastes really,
yeah,
really good,
well,
like that ultra processed foods. That's
mm,
one of the more devious things is like it's made to be addictive. It's made to taste super good,
hmm,
even though it's
hard to
when
argue with that.
yeah, exactly. It tastes good, and like you said, with the
Hmm.
prices, it's cheaper per calorie, even though
Hmm.
they're empty calories. The price per
Hmm.
calorie is a lot lower on ultra processed foods. So you
Hmm.
combine that with the fact that it tastes great, and your kids love it, and it makes them happy, and it's just easier. Really,
Exactly, all
really
those
a perfect
things.
storm. Yeah, perfect storm for
Hmm.
manipulation. Um,
Hmm.
so in going a little more generally in your career, since the start of your career, how has the public's view shifted on food and nutrition in general that you've seen?
I don't know who you're talking about. It depends on who you're talking about.
Okay.
If you're
Yeah.
talking about the food movement people, they've become more active and it's bigger and they're noisier and
Yeah.
there's a lot more attention to these things, but most people are just trying to get by.
Okay. So you say like middle America, just the average person
They're
doesn't
just
really
trying
think
to
about
they're
food
just
a
trying
lot.
to get by. And then now, because everything in the United States is so politicized, anybody suggesting that somebody's diet isn't good for health or good for the planet is nanny stating or moving into areas that they really don't want to go, and there's a lot of resentment about it. I
Hmm.
don't tell people what to eat. I really
Yeah.
don't, unless they ask me. But
Right.
the I just say what I think the research shows, and I think the research is really pretty straightforward, and we know what a healthy diet is, and I'd like to see it made more accessible, affordable,
Yeah. So do you think
and
if
available.
right, that's a big one. So do you think if the markets were balanced and healthy food was equally and fairly priced compared to ultra processed foods and readily available to the average person in middle America, do you think the decision would be fairly obvious, or do you think there would be some sort of education from the government needed to,
Oh, you have to start when people are young.
yeah,
Because once you get through childhood, your food interests are fixed.
mm,
And if you grew up in a family where you were fed only processed foods and only fast food, you're not going to know anything else.
right,
And to expect people to change and begin to like something that they didn't grow up liking is asking a lot, I think.
mm,
Uh, and also, you have to teach cooking.
yeah,
If you're asking people to eat real foods, they have to be able to cook it.
that's true.
And the most successful educational programs that I've seen are schools with gardens, where kids are taught how to grow food and then they eat the food they grow, and that's transformative. At
Definitely.
least not for everybody, but for a lot of the kids who go through those programs, it's absolutely transformative.
Yeah, absolutely. So then again, does that come back to the government as well and sort of, I don't know, mandating is the right word, but recommending these
Mm.
type of programs in public
How
institutions?
about supporting those kinds of programs? That would
Yeah.
be nice. I mean, right now the government's doing exactly the opposite. So it's, it's hard to say, but governments change, and at some point, you would think that having a healthier population would be a reasonable goal of government because healthcare is so expensive.
Yeah.
And we don't have a healthcare system in this country. So it's
Right.
but because and in this sense, because profit is such an important motivator in so much of what goes on in society, that's what you have to look at, and only government can do anything about that.
Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
true.
we need government to we need a government that's interested in the health of the population and interested in social services and trying to do things for the
Yeah.
average American who
Yeah.
may or may not be able to afford, paying these things,
Yeah.
paying for these things.
So what's your just on the topic of government, what's your take on everything that we've seen in the last, I guess, 120 days with the Maha and now there's the Snap soda conversation,
Mm.
all that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, what's your opinion on that? Are we putting our resources in the wrong things, focusing too
I
much?
don't think we know how this is going to play out yet,
Yeah.
and I say that because I'm waiting for the second report.
Hmm.
There were two reports. The first one was an assessment of the state of health of American children, and the report gave a devastating account of that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, based on references, some of which were hallucinated, but
Yeah. I saw that.
hopefully they won't do that in the second report. The
Hmm.
second report is supposed to talk about what the agenda is. And until we know what the agenda is, it's very difficult to talk about. Well, one part of the agenda is to try to um, make SNAP recipients spend less money on sugar sweetened beverages and candy and other things that they think that are demonstrably unsafe. I see this not so much as a health initiative as a way to get at SNAP recipients, and it's part of the Republican agenda to try to cut SNAP. Very hard to separate those things, since the Department of Agriculture for years has turned down requests to do pilot projects, research projects, to look at the effects of taking sodas out of SNAP, for example. And now all of a sudden the Department of Agriculture is approving these things. To me, it looks like this is part of the campaign to cut SNAP benefits. But we'll see. We will see. And I hope that they're doing the research that goes with this to see what the effect of these waivers are in the states that have passed them, in which this is happening. Are people consuming fewer sugar-sweetened beverages? Are they buying fewer with their own money? How do they feel about it? Do they feel like this is demeaning and hurtful, or do they find it helpful?
Yeah.
I have some personal evidence that SNAP recipients would not mind having sugar-sweetened beverages taken out because it would discourage them from buying them, and they know they're not good for them.
Right.
So I don't know. I think there are a lot of questions that are still unanswered.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly hopeful at this stage because so far the very, very simple interventions in the food supply, taking color additives out and closing the loophole for the generally recognized as safe, this is being done voluntarily, and that, as if it's going to work.
That was one of the things too. I was.
It may or may not work.
I was relatively optimistic coming into it. There's a lot of sounds good, but there's a lot of like when I heard about the dyes being banned, for example, everything said banned,
banned, but they're not banned at all.
Exactly. It's completely voluntary. There's a couple year runway for it, and then at the end of that runway, they don't have anything planned for people who don't comply.
Right. The states may take care of that. If there are states that are literally banning these things, and then the food companies are not going to want to make different products for different states. So that may do it, and they have alternatives. This one was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It should be really, really simple. But food companies have a long history of not doing things voluntarily.
Right.
And the assumption that they will because somebody told them to seems naive at best. And the lobbying has only just started.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting conversation, because, like you said, they have alternatives available, and that's where there has to be some culpability on the parts of the food companies when in Canada they have an identical version of, say, Fruit Loops that doesn't have the dyes, yet despite the evidence against them, they choose to not use them here. So
I just bought. By the way, I just bought Canadian Fruit Loops, and they had the food dyes.
Oh, did they?
Yes.
Oh. That's what I was talking about with the social media.
So I just bought a box. I have a box in my office of Fruit Loops with marshmallows yet, in French and English, and it's got the dyes. So I don't know what that means. It's we have to wait and see.
Yeah. So with removing, just the example of removing soda from SNAP, if say there is no reduction in the SNAP benefits themselves, and again, I don't know what that policy is going to look like. Do you think that needs to be paired with a policy that addresses accessibility too? So say
well, one of the things they've done with SNAP is to cut SNAP Ed. They've eliminated the SNAP education program, which was the one program that was working with SNAP recipients to educate them about how to use the products that everybody wants them to be buying. That program's been ended.
Interesting. Is that within this presidency?
Yeah, it just happened a week or so ago. It's been ended, and So there are parts of the administration are working at cross purposes. It's not clear to me that they're talking to each other.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's certainly not clear that there's a strategy here.
Mm-hmm.
And that if there's strategic thinking for anything but cutting budget, I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I've noticed that too. Again, I was super optimistic, but there seems like there's no synchronicity between the decisions that are being made right now. And we don't have to stay on politics, but one thing that we talk about a lot, because again, we work with farmers, and a lot of them are meat, so they're ranchers, whether it's beef, chicken, turkey, bison, a whole range of it. So you've talked a lot about high fat and dairy being an issue, and don't let me put words in your mouth. Tell me if you disagree with this. You say limiting meats, having more plants being abundant in your diet, um, and obviously there's literature linking especially red meat to cardiovascular issues and other chronic conditions, but there's no literature that specifically looks at local pasture raised grass fed beef, and compares it directly to industrial beef. And there are some shorter term studies recently that look at that specifically, and they've shown uh, lower inflammatory markers, and improved phospholipid profiles in pasture raised beef versus feedlot. I guess, what's your perspective on that? Has it shifted at all?
No, I mean, that's what it says. That's what the literature says. There's not
Yeah,
much. There's so little of it, it's hard to do research on it.
right.
But I think the general principle, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, still holds.
Mm,
And
okay.
mostly plants doesn't mean exclusively plants
Yeah,
necessarily.
right.
But it certainly means making sure you get plenty of fiber containing foods in your diet.
Yeah,
And meat
definitely.
doesn't have any fiber.
Yeah, yeah, and that's true. Like you said, not exclusively plants, because there are certainly things in meat that you can't get in the fully
Hmm.
plant-based diet. So,
Hmm.
um, so adjacent to meat is fish. And you have a new book, I believe it just came out
Just came out
this
this
week.
week,
Yeah,
right? The fish
the
counter.
fish counter. And obviously you can talk about the politics of seafood.
Hmm.
We have a few different vendors who they have wild caught Alaskan salmon. So a lot of our customers, that's some of their favorite food is that
Hmm.
seafood. So how can consumers make conscious, informed choices when it comes to seafood?
Oh, ooh, that's a
Go into
hard
it.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Wild West of the supermarket, and you need a fish seller who knows what they're doing. And there are plenty of supermarkets that have fish sellers that know what they're doing, and there are plenty of supermarkets that don't. And ask questions. The labeling helps, but I don't know about you. I can't tell the difference between one white fillet and another.
No, it's tough.
They all look alike to me, so I depend on the fish seller to tell me what they are,
Mm,
and also to tell me how to cook them because I don't always know.
yeah.
And I think that for most people, it's just really difficult because the labeling isn't always accurate. And some of the labeling is hilarious because it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I've got stories about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All wild fish in Canada is farm raised, is my favorite, all time
Mm,
favorite. It's complicated, and the politics are complicated, and the book is about the issues that you need to know. The book is called The Fish Counter, and it's the fish chapters from a forthcoming book, What to Eat Now, that's coming out in November, and they just made it into this little teeny separate book.
yeah.
It's
It's
a
beautiful. I
pamphlet.
love the
It's a
covers.
it's a pamphlet, really,
Yeah.
and and I talk about all the different issues that you need to think about: methyl mercury and PCBs and PFAS and
Yeah.
the environmental damage caused by fish farming, and what happens on fishing vessels to
Mm,
the United Nations observers who are on them. I mean, it's really complicated, and of course, nobody sees that. And if
yeah.
you buy your little frozen fillet in the supermarket, you're pretty taken, you don't really see it. And fish
Yeah.
is very expensive these days, and
Yeah.
it's become a luxury.
Yeah, and I think like you said, it's seafood is especially unique because it's so people are so detached from it. Like you drive around, especially I'm in the Midwest, so I drive around, you see farms. If you've never been to a farm or seen animals, livestock being raised or plants being harvested, it's still part of your community in some way. Versus seafood, especially like from the ocean, that's you're so detached from it. You don't know what to ask, you don't know what to look for, and you just assume. I think there's an inherent assumption with consumers that it's a fish, it was caught. Like you catch fish in the ocean or in a lake. You don't farm fish. I think that's something that people are kind of coming around to more and more. But yeah, it's definitely something newer that
Well,
people.
as the oceans are depleted of fish,
Yeah,
farming becomes increasingly attractive, but it raises lots and lots and lots of problems
mm,
that have not yet been solved. And for one thing, for fish to taste good, they have to eat other fish,
yeah,
for the most part. And that means you're catching fish to feed fish. I mean, it's an insane system,
yeah,
and it has lots and lots of problems with it. And anyway, I talk about that and talk about how you make choices. But the easiest way to do it is to find somebody who knows what they're doing,
yeah.
and shop there.
Yeah,
But yes, the
I'm not sure
Wild West of the supermarket.
definitely. Something interesting. I don't know a ton about this. I read an article briefly about it, but you mentioned like the PFAS and the methyl mercury and all the things that are in the wild fish. I saw something recently about like controlled farming, where I guess the benefit of a super hyper controlled ethical, whatever that means, fish farm is that they can keep out the PFAS and they can make sure there's no mercury within
Mhm.
it. So have you seen anything about that? I mean, obviously, like,
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, they can. The
right,
question is, are they? But the
mm,
real question is, what are they feeding the fish?
okay.
That's the big question: is what are they feeding them?
And
And
what do they
the
typically feed them at a conventional fish
well,
farm?
they feed them dog food.
Mm,
Dog pellets, the equivalent of corn and soybean pellets.
yeah,
But that's not what fish are raised to eat.
no,
Fish are raised to eat plankton, plants, and microscopic plants and animals, or big fish eat little fish.
yeah,
And so it really depends on, and everybody's trying to cut costs. So they're going to feed fish the cheapest feed they possibly can.
yeah.
And
Is
that's part of the problem.
Yeah, how does that like aside from just taste, how does that impact the nutrient composition of the fish
Well,
versus
one of the reasons that you want to eat fish is because of their omega-3 fat content.
yeah,
And unless you feed them sources of omega-3s, they're not going to have them.
yeah,
That's another problem with fish farming. I mean, there are really a lot of issues, and some fish farming companies have solved these problems to some extent, and some haven't.
yeah,
And you hope that the fish seller that you're working with is working with a fish farming entity that is doing the right thing.
yeah. And I think that's an important point, and one of the big things that there's a surface level understanding of wild caught versus farm raised when it comes to fish, and grass fed versus grain fed when it comes to cows, for example. But like you mentioned with the omega threes, that's the why is never really understood or seldom understood. So again, with the beef, it's the when they're grass fed, grass finished, their ratio of omega three to omega six is much more optimal versus the grain fed. But at the supermarket, all you see is a cheaper option and a more expensive option. And
Mm.
most of the times, the default, even for some people who have the financial uh, capability of choosing one or the other, a lot of times you go for the cheaper one because it's just more of a market decision.
And you
But
can't, and you can't, and you don't know what the difference is
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's quite complicated.